Okay, excellent. So it's a privilege for us at Rabbi Shari Shemaim to be able to welcome Rabbi David Fine. Rabbi Fine is the founder and the dean of Bar Kai, which is a rabbinic training program in Israel for rabbis who are already or will soon be leaders of congregations and of communities within Israel. And the goal of this program is to give rabbis the skills that you don't learn when from the Shulchan Aruch or from the Beis Yosef and the Torah. And it's to train rabbis in the day-to-day lives and needs of their communities, whether it be in bringing psychologists to work with those rabbis, or to bring experts in counseling and in awareness of social and cultural issues that affect their people, to be able to give them those skills that they're going to need to properly lead their communities. And it's not just the Rabbanim that they teach, it's also the Rabbaniot, the Rebbitzins in those communities as well, which are also a part of this program. And it's a program which, as you saw in the video this morning, has received the chairmanship and is under the ceremonial leadership of Rabbi David, of Rabbi Lau, or Yisrael Meir Lau, excuse me.
Right.
The former chief rabbi, not the current chief rabbi, but the former chief rabbi. And it's something that he very much supports, and is certainly is something which reflects his career and his vision for Am Yisrael. So it's really a great privilege for us to be able to welcome Rabbi Fine, who is the founder and the dean of this program. And Rabbi Fine is also formerly a rabbi in North America as well. He was a rabbi in Kansas City for many years. And he took his lessons and his leadership and his wisdom to be able to make Israel that much better. And as I noted earlier, Rabbi Fine is speaking to us in the middle of the night in Israel. And I thought that he would be doing us a great favor and staying up late for us. Unfortunately, he would be up anyway, because there were a series of alarms and sirens that went off just 15 minutes ago, that we were discussing whether Rabbi Fine was going to actually be able to be here to give this shiur. And Baruch Hashem, he is. But as I noted earlier, it's entirely possible that a siren might go off, and we may need to close the shiur if Rabbi Fine needs to go to his safe room if it becomes necessary. So with that introduction, that I thought I'd never ever give an introduction like that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Rabbi Fine to teach us Torah and to explain a little bit about some of his important work.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Strachler. It's really an honor and a privilege to be included in this Pre-Shavuot Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And I just want to, for those of you who came on late, Rabbi Strachler asked me to just spend a few minutes talking about what's going on here in Israel right now. There are really two things going on. The second thing is not getting as much attention because of the rockets. But right as we speak, literally, central Israel is being showered with rockets. Tel Aviv, Ra'anana, Modi'in, where I live. I just literally 10 minutes came out of our safe room because there was a siren. So this affects the work of our rabbis. We have 91 rabbis that we trained around the country, and there's just been a lot of tension and a lot of anxiety. And people are turning to their rabbis for solace and for help and for support and assistance and spiritual support. So we thought Corona is lessening in Israel. It's less of an issue now. We thought we'd have some breathing room, and we are led straight to this. The other thing that's going on is there's very violent friction in Arab-Israeli towns. The one that's gotten most attention is in Lud. That's the city where the airport is found. There have been vicious riots that have gone on there. Arabs attacking. There was a mechina, a pre-army academy, a synagogue burnt down by arson in Lud a few nights ago by Arab rioters. And this is going on now in other cities such as Akko and Bat Yam. And so it's a very intense time. And just personally, my son, who's in an elite commando unit in the army, is right now on the border of Gaza. So things are pretty tense here, but I wanted to take the time to spend with you, nonetheless. As Rabbi Strauchler said, if there's a siren, I'm going to have to leave. I apologize in advance if that happens. And you may hear some booming in the background. That booming is not rockets, actually. It's the Iron Dome, which keeps us safe, which shoots down the rockets. It's actually around half a kilometer from my house. So even if I wanted to sleep and get some sleep before this year, because it's 2:05 in the morning here, I wouldn't be able to, because the Iron Dome has been going off, shooting down rockets and protecting Israel. Okay, so with that introduction, let's move on. Now, this is not going to be your typical shiur, having only Torah sources, because Rabbi Strauchler wanted me to talk about the work that I do here in Israel. Running a rabbinic training program is not the only thing we do. We're trying to really change the culture in Israeli society by creating community. One of the things that I learned when I got here is that communities don't really exist in Israel as we know them from North America. But I'll get to that later. I want to start with the pasuk, "Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar." This is a well-known verse in the Torah preceding the giving of the Torah in the book of Shemot, and it talks about the people encamping opposite the mountain, right? And the verb used here is vayichan, and it's in the singular, not in the plural. It should say vayachanu sham Yisrael neged Ahar. So Rashi tells us that it says it in the singular, vayichan, because the people were unified. They were unified at that time, but all the other encampments in the desert, and probably since then, the people were not together. They were involved in machloket. They were involved in argument. And I think that this issue of disunity is an issue that is going on in Israeli society right now. There's a deep divide in Israeli society now, much more than ever, because of Corona and the Meron tragedy a few weeks ago. There's a deep divide. The more secular side, the more Chiloni side, accuses the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, of not following the rules, not following the laws, and there's just as much hatred sometimes in the other direction. A Gesher poll, the Gesher organization arranged a poll around 6 weeks ago. They released the results, and the results told us that the biggest fear in Israeli society was this fear of the divide between the various components of society. It wasn't about Iran, and it wasn't about Hamas or Hezbollah. Over 60% of the people, a majority of the people polled in Israel, were afraid of this divide between Haredim and Chilonim. And as I've said moments ago, it's gotten a lot worse over the last year, mostly because of Corona. And I feel that the Chilonim have had Torah taken away from them. It's not just a coincidence that Chilonim are Chilonim. I think it happened for a reason, and I'd like to talk about that reason. The reason is one word, what we call mamlachtiut. Mamlachtiut, as you may hear in the word, comes from the word melech. The word melech means king. Malchut means kingdom, but it's not malchut, it's mamlachtiut. Mamlachtiut really defies a definition in English. The best definition that I could come up with is statism, statism, which means that everything is directed towards the state. All priorities and all resources are used in order to make the state paramount in people's lives. And what we're going to talk about mamlachtiut in a minute, but I believe that we in Barkai have the solution to curing this rift in Israeli society. and that is by creating a community. My co-founder of Barkai, Rabbi Shlomo Sobel, who is a 12th generation Jerusalemite, he was the co-founder of Barkai with me, and he was really the brains behind it. He learned about community when he was a shaliach, when he represented the Torah Mitzion organization in Detroit, Michigan, for a number of years. He came back and he said, "I've lived in Jerusalem all my life. I've never been in America." After a few years of living in America, he said that he learned what a community was by being in America, because there's really a lack of community here. Many Jews go to synagogue, many religious Jews go to synagogue. The synagogue here is seen as something that is just for tefillot, just for prayers and an occasional class. The rabbi and the synagogue are not really the focus of, or the center of the community, the way they are in North America and in all other places in the Jewish exile. So I'd like to, before we get into some sources, I'd like to just tell you a little bit of my personal experience. I came to Israel, as Rabbi Straffler said. I was a pulpit rabbi both in Milwaukee and Kansas City. I was a rabbi for a decade in Israel, in America, and I thought that I would just come to Israel and pick up where I left off and become a community rabbi and find a shul and do the same thing in Israel that I did in America. And I got here and I got a wake-up call that the job of a rabbi, the synagogue, almost doesn't exist in Israel. It's not really a professionalized job. Rabbis here, all rabbis of synagogues have other full-time jobs where they make a living, because the shuls that have rabbis don't even pay their rabbis, or if they pay them a few thousand shekel a month at best, which doesn't allow them to live their lives. So they have to have full-time jobs in addition to their jobs as synagogue rabbis. Most of the synagogues in Israel do not have rabbis. Over 95% of the synagogues in Israel do not have any rabbi. So as I said, I got a wake-up call, and I had to totally recreate my own career. And that's where Barkai comes in. Barkai is a rabbinic training program, but it's more than a rabbinic training program. It's really a program to create community in Israel, to bring about community. One of the things that the Chilonim are missing, secular Jews are missing, is community. I'll just tell you one quick story, and then we'll get into the sources. In my building, I have 7 other families that live in our apartment building. And we're the only, Olim, we're the only Americans, and we're the only religious people. I noticed one day, coming down to my apartment, because we live in the -2 floor, I noticed an Avelut sign. In Israel, when people pass away, they put up these posters informing the public that someone has passed away. They usually put it on the door of the Shiva house so that people know where the Shiva house is. So I was walking down and to my apartment, and I saw a sign of one of my neighbors that she had lost her parents. And so I decided that, being a good neighbor and being a good Jew and a rabbi, I was going to go pay a Shiva call. So I went in, and I was the only person there. And this is not out of the norm. Chilonim do not really have communities. Many of them have communities in their school, but this woman, in their children's school, but this woman didn't have school-age children anymore. So these are stories that occur all the time in Israel, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of background before talking about why I think this happened historically, and why I think we have part of the solution. No one has the entire solution to bring about an end to this problem. So if Rabbi Straffler, I could maybe share my screen.
You're a co-host.
Oh, I am. Okay, hold on a second. Okay. and I haven't done this in a long time.
You got it. It's sharing.
Okay. Do people see the sheet?
You may want to make it a little bit larger. It's just zoom in a little bit on the file.
Okay, fine. Zoom. Sorry. Big on my computer. Okay. Is that better?
A little bigger, a little bigger.
A little bigger, okay. By the way, as I'm sitting here, many people may have the Tseva Adom, the red alert app on their phone, which tells you when rockets are coming in. So my phone is buzzing like every few seconds here that there are rockets coming. So
if there's a rocket coming towards Modi'in, we want you to go to your room.
Okay, let me make this a little bigger. Is that better?
Yes, it's a bit better, yes.
Okay, I'll make it even bigger. Okay, is that good? Can you read it?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about what I said before, what mamlachtiyut is. Mamlachtiyut, as I said, is statism. And I believe that this is the reason that there is no community to speak of in Israel, and why we got to the point we are. I believe that this was done purposefully, and it didn't just happen. So I want to look at some scholarly works about this. The first one is a book by Nir Kedar, who wrote a book called Ben Gurion's Mamlachtiyut, Etymological and Theoretical Research. And I'll just read, and then we'll talk about it for a moment. Ben Gurion sought to compensate the Jewish people for its suffering and lack of sovereignty by conjuring up a majestic image of grandeur. From this point of view, it would appear that Ben Gurion rejected connection with the word community, preferring to sever the association between the nascent Jewish Israeli polity, meaning Israel, the early Israel, and the Jewish people's recent lacrimal past in the Galut. Lacrimal, for those of you who don't know, means tragic or sad past in the Galut. In his struggle to forge a new Jew, Ben Gurion jettisoned the traditional political symbol of Galut life, the Jewish community, by replacing it with a remodeled image of Jewish sovereignty, the biblical, mythical Hebrew kingdom. So in plain English, what this is trying to say is that Ben Gurion wanted to sever the recently created state of Israel from the idea of the Jewish community. The Jewish community that for 2,000 years had always been the central force in Judaism was severed from the newly created state of Israel. This was done purposely by Ben Gurion and his the other leadership around him. Not to say anything bad about Ben Gurion. If it wasn't for Ben Gurion, we wouldn't be here today. A great man, but he believed that the Jewish community was not only a thing of the past, but it represented what we call an exilic. It represented the old Jew, the Jew in the diaspora. But the new Jew had to be one that was separated from community and instead directed towards the state. Everything needed to be directed towards the newly created state of Israel. This is a similar idea in source number 2. And by the way, if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to write in the chat or whatever. Charles Liebman and Eliezer Dan Yichya, Civil Religion in Israel. The creation of Israel and the tripling of its population in 3 years led state leaders to feel that the country must be completely integrated, that the value belief symbol system separating the various camps must be abolished and replaced by a unified symbol uniting the entire Jewish population in support of the state and its institutions. The Yishuv lacked central political institutions that could evoke loyalty and commitment. With the establishment of the state, many of the functions and services which had hitherto been performed by voluntary organizations came under control of central state agencies and governmental ministries. The transfer of authority was accompanied by changes in social values. The establishment of a sovereign state after so long a period in the diaspora placed an even greater emphasis on the state as a symbol of national survival. That's perhaps the best definition of mamlachtiyut that I have found. That everything again had to be directed to the state. Now, it's not just the roads and security and the water and the electricity and all the other things that are provided by the state, but the state also decided that it needed to control religious issues. And it made the rabbi in Israel, from then until this day, in many ways, a mere technocrat. Rabbis are responsible for overseeing kashrut in cities, for an eruv, for Jewish marriages and divorces, and things of that nature. But rabbis are really not involved. We're changing that, but rabbis are really not involved in the day-to-day lives of Jewish people. Many of the secular Jews only meet a rabbi a few times in their life, right? Most secular Jews don't even go to shul on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur in Israel is known as Yom Ofanayim, bicycle day, because since there is a custom that no one drives in the roads in Israel on Yom Kippur, so the roads are open, and on Pre-Shavuot, on road number 1, the main highway going from the airport to Jerusalem, people are riding their bikes all over Israel. So as I said, most of these secular Jews, who are all, again, very good people, very committed to the state of Israel, very identified Jews in many ways, but they have very little connection very often with religion. And as I said, many of these secular Jews hardly ever come into contact with a rabbi. Maybe when they get married, maybe if there's a death in their family, but otherwise, there's really a lack of intimacy between many people, most people in Israel, and their rabbi. Now, I wanted to show you something in Hebrew. For those of you who may not understand, I will translate. I guess you can see my cursor. I'm up to here. This is by Shai Ben Yosef. Shai Ben Yosef is one of the instructors in Barkai. He's a professor of sociology, and he is perhaps known as the expert on communities in Israel. And he teaches the Barkai course to our rabbis, first course, which is, what is a community? Right? Many of our rabbis didn't grow up in a community model, and therefore they have no idea what living in a Jewish community and what leading a Jewish community really means. Some of our rabbis, before they come to Barkai, think that their job is to go into the community and teach the highest level Talmud shir, which is also part of their job, but not necessarily go visit the person in the hospital, not necessarily counsel the person who needs counsel, who's suffering from anxiety. So that's what Shai Ben Yosef does. And he wrote as follows: Hakamata shel Medinat Yisrael bisra et mimush hanormaliyot shel Yehudi hachadash shel lechora einu zakuk lekihila klal. Right, the establishment of the state of Israel brought to fore the normalization of the Yehudi hachadash, the new Jew. Shel lechora einu zakuk lekihila klal. Who seemingly does not need a kihila, a community at all. B'makom kihila yesh lo mamlacha. In place of a community, he has a kingdom. That word again, mamlachtiyut, hasholetet b'ma'arachot hasherutim, that rules over all frameworks, all systems of services that are offered by the state. Mamlacha hamivatzat sotsializatia al yedei marachot chinuch v'tarbut. The state rules over frameworks of the education system and the cultural system. And this is where I wanted to where I wanted to emphasize, filu al yedei batei hamidrash, and even the Beit HaMidrash, the Batei HaMidrash, meaning that the state has taken control of the entire religious functioning of the state of Israel, just as it has taken over the cultural, the physical, again, the security of the state. And I'm just gonna skip to the last line. Hanormaliyut, right? And hanormaliyut means normalcy. It's in quotes because this is really not normal. This is a change. The state of Israel is a change from 2,000 years of Jewish history. Hanormaliyut hishtalta kol kach ad shenishmat hamanganon ha'chavrati shechazik et ha'am ha'yehudi orech torot rabim. This new normalcy has ruled so much to the point that the apparatus that has kept the Jewish people together for so long has basically been erased. And that, again, is the Jewish community. And here's an amazing statement by Giddy Greenstein in number 4. He wrote a book called Flexigidity. It's a look at Judaism that talks about the two opposites in Judaism. One is being flexible, that Judaism is flexible, and that's what has allowed it to make it for so many years. But also there's rigidity in Judaism. And the balance of these two have really kept Judaism alive, according to Greenstein, for all these years. And what he writes is an amazing quote. I'm just going to make this a little bigger because you've been... hold on a second. Okay. And he says, by the late 1990s, right? So this is something that started with the beginning of the state, but is still continuing to this day. The 1990s was not so long ago. By the late 1990s, the basic societal unit of Israel's society was no longer the community, but rather the individual household. In fact, this is the line. Israel represents the first case in Jewish history where a significant number of committed Jews do not live within a community. That, to me, is an amazing statement. And it's something that I had no idea was true until I arrived in Israel. Now, I like to, so that is my sort of historical analysis of the situation in 27 minutes. It really deserves a lot more of a discussion, but I think that this was done, just to summarize, this was done purposely in order to create the state of Israel. The early founders of Zionism, Ben Gurion and the people around him, thought that Orthodox Jews wouldn't even continue to exist into the far future. That this had to be done, this taking away of community had to be done in order to create the new state of Israel. We're going to get back to a little sociology and history in a little bit, but I wanted to just tell you a little bit about some of the work that we do. But before we do that, I want to discuss, I've been talking about rabbis, and I mentioned rabbis, and I mentioned the fact that the rabbis don't really understand, many of the rabbis in Israel don't really understand what their function in a community is, and that's something that we teach them. I want to understand what the role of a rabbi is. So there are two pieces that I brought here from Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, the Sridei Eish. And the first one is pretty famous. The second one, not as much. Rabbi Soloveitchik in Halachic Man says as follows. My uncle, Rav Meir Berlin, that's who Bar Ilan is founded, was named after Bar Ilan University. Rav Meir Berlin, the Rav's uncle, told me once that Rav Chaim of Brisk was asked what the function of a rabbi is. Rav Chaim replied, to redress the grievances of those who are abandoned and alone, to protect the dignity of the poor, and to save the oppressed from the hands of his oppressor. Neither ritual decisions nor political leadership constitutes the main task of halachic man. We could go on, far from it. The actualization of the ideals of justice and righteousness is the pillar of fire which halachic man follows when he, as a rabbi and teacher in Israel, serves his community. More, through the implementation of the principles of righteousness, man fulfills the task of creation imposed upon him, the perfection of the world under the dominion of halakha, and the renewal of the face of creation. No religious cult is of any worth if the laws and principles of righteousness are violated and trampled upon by the foot of pride. So I think this, in many ways, speaks for itself. We see here that Rav Chaim of Brisk, who perhaps influenced the study of Torah till this day more than anyone else in the past 150 years, we would have expected that he would have said the function of a rabbi is to learn Torah and to teach Torah and to come up with chidushim, not novelties in Torah learning. But nevertheless, Rav Chaim, that icon of Torah learning and Talmud learning tells us that helping people, that being there for people and helping the abandoned and alone and the poor and the oppressed, that's really what the job of a rabbi is. Rabbi Strauchler at the beginning said things that are not taught, that we try to teach things that are not taught in the Shulchan Aruch or the Torah, the Beit Yosef, or the codes of Jewish law. We try and teach them what we often call the fifth section of the Shulchan Aruch, right? There are 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch. There is no real fifth section of the Shulchan Aruch. And that's what we try to impress upon the rabbis, that to redress the grievances of those who are abandoned and alone, to protect the dignity of the poor, and to save the oppressed from the hands of his oppressor. Next is a quote by Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. Rabbis, as the bearers of the word of God, must expound for their people and the world Judaism's view on all the issues of morality, law, and social justice that confound the new generation. They must demonstrate that Judaism is not just a set of religious laws and customs, but a decisive spiritual force in human life. And of course, they must not leave any problem or offense by the natural sciences without a fair and persuasive response. According to Rabbi Weinberg, moreover, a rabbi must be familiar with the goings on around him in the world of science and literature and the changing cultural currents. Without a systematic education and without knowing the language of modern thought, he will not be able to find the pathway into an emotional contact with the inner world of the youth and members of the new generation. And this is something, again, which I think speaks for itself. And these are the kinds of rabbis that we are trying to bring up, to lift up, to create in Barkai. People should know that in America, let's say, you can't get a rabbinical education without receiving practical rabbinic education. Not just halakha and Talmud and Jewish law, but practical, how to work with people, how to do counseling, how to do the psychology that Rabbi Strauchler talked about at the beginning. From ultra-reform to ultra-orthodox, if you are in a rabbinic training program in smicha, and you're actually going to end up talking to another person as a rabbi, no institution today will let you leave without some practical rabbinic training. In Israel, that is not true. You are not required to have any rabbinic training, practical rabbinic training, in order to become a rabbi. And what I've been saying this whole time is that there really are no communities. Communities are not focused around synagogues and the rabbis. So maybe there wasn't a need for it. But as people are recognizing the need for community, you can't just have a state. You can't just have a corporate. You have to have, in order for people to have meaning in their lives, and in order for people to be connected to Judaism and to appreciate Judaism and not just see it as a bunch of rabbis that I meet once in a while or a few times in my life who are imposing all these restrictions and rules upon me. If we don't want to have that, we have to create these kinds of communities and these kinds of rabbis. I want to leave some time for questions. So I want to turn to, there are only a few more sources, don't worry. I want to turn to a few quotes by Rav Kook. These both come from the Igrot HaRe'ayah. Rav Kook, of course, was the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He saw a very different rabbinate, a chief rabbinate. He prophesized, he didn't prophesize because it hasn't really come to be. Because as I've said throughout this year constantly, and I find myself repeating myself too much, that the Rabbanut has not done what he dreamed it could do. He wrote as follows: Bildul Kvod HaRabbanut, the lessening of the honor of the Rabbanut, Garam Harbel the Dildula Shal Ha'umah B'Chomer U'Veruach, has created a great embarrassment or lowering of the people, both in physical and in spirit. Okay, and he believed even then, even when he lived, people were already begging, not happy with the Rabbanut. But he says that Harabbanut ze hakoach hachashuv asher yatzar tamid et dad hakahal b'Yisrael. The Rabbanut, the rabbinate, and again, this is the central rabbinate. This is the most important force that has always created the view of the community in Israel. In plain English, he's basically saying that the rabbinate has always been that which has held up the soul of the nation and has awakened it to national life, full and fixed national life. He believed that it was the Jewish community, much different than Ben Gurion. He believed it was the Jewish community and rabbis leading the Jewish community that brought about the state of mind, the state of Judaism, that it could even accomplish a Zionism and state of Israel in the first place. Very, almost a total different outlook than Ben Gurion that we saw at the beginning. I always say that Barkai was really a dream of Rav Kook himself. In source number 7, also from the letters that he wrote, he says, Nishtamesh b'chol otam hadrachim shehador achai v'hapoel mishtamesh b'hem v'nishtadel lefatech yoter et kishron hadibur v'hatafa achaya shel talmideinu. He basically is saying here that we are going to create within the yeshiva system a track which is going to enable people to learn how to speak and to learn from the experts in every topic under the sun. He says here, "L'chol miksoa u'miksoa yu morim mumchim u'muvhakim yirei Hashem v'chachmei lev asher yoru et talmidim." In every miksoa, a miksoa is not a Torah subject, but it's a more secular subject. In every subject, there will be specialist teachers who are fearing of God and wise people that will instruct the student. This was inside the yeshiva system that he envisioned. Our Barkai program is outside of the yeshiva system, meaning the rabbis study in yeshiva, they get their smicha, and they're able to concentrate only on their Torah learning. And then after they receive their smicha, and after they attain a job in a synagogue, they come to our training program, which is a 2-year rabbinic training program. 1 full day a week. They attend classes here in Modi'in, where thank God there are no sirens going off right now. And 1 full day a week for 2 years, where they receive the education in all matters having to do with being a leader and being a counselor and being a pastor. Now, I just want to conclude my remarks by saying that I think there's room for hope. I think that this idea of statism, a mamlachtiyut, is in many ways dying out. Even in the secular community, which I mentioned before, there is a great desire for a sense of community. But how do Jews really create community without the synagogue, without rabbinic leadership? Many of the secular in the state of Israel are seeing this as a very difficult feat to achieve. But as I said, I think that there is great room for hope. And I just want to review 3 sources, quick sources with you. Gideon Greenstein, Zionism and Peoplehood toward a Historic Synthesis. This is the same Gideon Greenstein who before had told us that most Jews in Israel do not live in a community. It says, furthermore, the narrative of state building and a mamlachtiyut has been replaced by a focus on community building and diversity. As Israelis embrace their Jewish heritage, and Israel's public sphere is filled with spiritual innovation. It is true that there is what we call here Hitchadshut HaYehudit, or Moreshet Yehudit. There is a desire of many people in the secular world, not necessarily of changing their lives and becoming fully religious people, but over the last, over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a movement in Israel that has sought to bring Jewish practice and Jewish wisdom to the secular community, and the secular community has wanted it. There's Judaism everywhere now, in entertainment, in the army, in many of the areas where it was never considered correct to discuss Judaism or bring any Jewish sources to the fore. A similar idea is shared with us by Yair Sheleg, who's a journalist in Israel. And this is an article that he wrote, just a few lines in Jewish Ideas Daily. The political hegemony of labor Zionism has been in dreary decline since the 1970s. No less consequential, and perhaps more so, is the steady dissolution of the social and cultural ethos which labor built the state, society, and culture. That ethos, statist, collectivist, secularist, proved no match for the enduring need for human transcendence. Right? We have a need for human transcendence. We don't just need religion for getting married or being buried or having a bar mitzvah or having a seder. Right? We need religion, and everyone needs community in order to attain this need that we have for human transcendence. As a proof that this is happening in Israel, I just took actually a headline of a newspaper article from the NRG website. I don't NRG I think are people who own the Ma'ariv newspaper, and they have a website. It's called NRG, and it says Chilonim, and this is written by a secular Jew. Chilonim, yesh lanu ma lilmod me'hacharedim. Secular Jews, we have what to learn from the Charedim. Anu mitkanim b'koach hatzricha charedi b'achdut b'choser parshanut. We are jealous of the Charedim, they say, with their achdut, their unity. Zemit bateb ba'arvut hadadit. This is the main sense here. This is expressed in collective responsibility for each other. Zehut, collectivity, with a collective identity. Reshet chinuch mishutefet, and a joint educational system. Tomer Dror medaber al ha'edbar hatzioni shel darenu gilat yud. Tomer Dror, who's the author of this article, who's a secular Jew, speaks about the challenge, the Zionist challenge of our generation, which he says in one word is gilat yud, is community. So I hope through these sources and from the stories I've told and from some of the comments that I've made, that I have been able to share with you what I think has happened historically in Israeli society, what's been happening sociologically, and the work that we in Barkai are doing in order not only to train rabbis to be leaders and to be counselors and be pastors, but to create community around the synagogue and be welcoming to religious Jews and secular Jews alike. So that concludes what I wanted to say. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be very happy to hear them.
Maybe if you could stop share so you can see everyone and
sure.
questions. Excellent. Would anyone like to pose a question to Rabbi Fine? Yes, Simcha.
Yes,
please.
Simcha.
I have a question.
I can't hear you.
Rav, I appreciate that, and Chag Sameach. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yes. Thank you very much.
When I came to Israel in 1962, just before the 6-Day War, one of the things that shocked me is that all the people who created the state, one of the first things they did is change their last name.
Right.
They changed their last name. Ben Gurion is a new name. You know, I don't want to get into details, and it shocked me a little bit because coming me from Mexico, from a very community that goes back to its roots, I asked why, and he says, well, they want to break with all the things that they left. They want to create something new. So I took the answer without consequences. But one of the things I found very puzzling is that the Ministry of Education in Israel has been for a long time in the hands of the Haredim. I think it's a big mistake, Rav, because they are the ones who don't pay attention how to bring a kahal and create communities. I would like to hear your comments on that. That is a mistake that it continues to be, as in my opinion, it will not solve the problem, it will make it more difficult. So I would like to hear your opinion about the Ministry of Education.
Yeah, I don't want to overgeneralize here because we just ended off with the source that said that the secular were jealous of the Haredim because the Haredim are able to create community. Some people may not like the kinds of communities that Haredim have created. And you are certainly right that most of the power, the rabbinic power in the state of Israel is in the hands of the Haredim. But I see this is changing. I see Barkai, what the organization that we run and some other organizations that are doing some similar work, creating, instead of a top-down rabbinate, they're creating a ground-up rabbinate. And in some ways, this will provide for the needs of people that have never had their needs met by a rabbinate, which is merely a technocratic rabbinate, which is merely a provider of services. And I think that as this new model makes its way into Israeli society, that there'll be much more power in the hands of these synagogue rabbis, and they'll be able to show, a much more welcoming face of Judaism. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Okay. And by the way, I just think that you started with people changing their names. I think that's a perfect example of this mamlachtiyut that I spoke about. Right? Mamlachtiyut was that everything is about the new state of Israel. That we have to break with our past. And in order to break with our past, we'll go so far as to change our names. So anyone else?
I have a question. My name's Robin. And my question to you is this: how do you begin to build a bridge or cross the divide between the secular and religious? And in my experience of people that I know well in Israel, they're either religious or secular. And when they're secular, they're so secular that they really, I have to say, hate religion. So in spite of the last quote that you gave, and particularly, post what happened in Har Meron, there's such contempt for the decision-making of the religious. So what's your organization's strategy to bring people closer to the synagogue as a community center for those people that are so feeling so negatively disposed toward the religious in Israel?
So thank you, Robin. That's a very important comment and question. I certainly agree with your analysis. I believe that I always say there are two sides in Israel, the secular and the religious. Outside of Israel, there's a chance that people will, come from the secular side to the religious side. In many ways in Israel, you're correct. That really cannot happen. Because of the way society is built, and for the contempt, as you say, that many secular Israelis have for religion. But I think the answer to your question is rather simple. I think that by creating the kind of synagogue and community that is open to the entire neighborhood, whether you're religious or not, is something that will just draw people in, right? I always say that in my synagogue in Kansas City, there were people that came to a synagogue 3 times a year. and they came to synagogue 3 times a year, maybe because their grandparents did. They weren't necessarily observant of Jewish law. Why do people like that necessarily pay dues to a synagogue if they're only going to come 3 times a year, and you could come those 3 times a year without paying? So I think that one of the answers is that people still want to see the rabbi as an address. They know that the rabbi is there for them if they ever need him. They know that if people are having marital problems or a problem with a child or something, they may not go to the rabbi. Sometimes they will, but they know that the rabbi is an address. In Israel, the rabbi is not an address for a secular person at all, right? Meaning, we want to create the kind of situation where you don't want to be religious, fine, but our rabbi does have some expertise in counseling. Our rabbi does have some expertise in helping people deal with all kinds of problems. So come and be part of the community for that. Come and be part of the community to receive this kind of service, which you may not be receiving in any other point in your life. And I think that you're certainly correct, Robin, that we have miles and miles to go. I don't pretend that this is going to be solved anytime soon, but I believe that by, again, bringing a more grounds up instead of top down model to the rabbinate, and by having everyone in our program is religious Zionists, that's me. They've all been to the army. These are people that secular people can connect to more than some other people that, like I said before, do control the rabbinate. So I think this is our solution. Again, it's not a perfect solution. It'll take many years, but we see it happening already.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, Charlie.
Can you give us some examples of maybe a success story of yours? Like an example of someone who went through your school and is successful in what he's doing.
We have many, many success stories. And I can't, nothing's coming to mind as I speak, but
let me fill in for mine, then I'll give him a success story, because I've had the opportunity to meet some of the Rabbi Fein's graduates. And I think that we did a call between rabbis in North America and rabbis in Israel at the beginning of Corona. And one of the rabbis told a story that he called people to go to his shul at the start of the Corona crisis just to say hello. And one of the people said, "But Rabbi, why are you calling me?" And the rabbi said, it was Rabbi Simpson, I think it was, who said, I'm just going to say hello. I have no agenda here. He said, no, Rabbi, I know you want something. He's like, no, I promise I don't. And the whole idea that a person would have a rabbi who would just be there for him, just to look after him, is something which is very foreign to Israel. And honestly, it's foreign not just to Israel, but to the modern secular mind to a large degree. And the certain individualism that is predominant within our society as a whole is something which is a little cynical about the role of religion. And this is for a person who was part of the shul. But it was always a question of, but Rabbi, really, why are you calling me? So I thought that was a little success story.
Yeah, and just to be extreme for a second, one of the areas where we teach the rabbis is suicide prevention. There's a big problem with suicides in Israel. People make a very large deal out of car accidents. That so many people die in car accidents in every year in Israel. There are actually more people that die of suicide in Israel every year. Around 500 people commit suicide in Israel every year. So we actually had a conference a few years ago about this for not only our own rabbis. We've trained 91 rabbis throughout the country, but for any rabbi across the state of Israel. And we asked all the rabbis, after training them how to do so responsibly, because you have to know how to do this responsibly. They spoke about this issue from their pulpit the following Shabbat. And around on the next Bar Kai session, the following Monday is when we have our Bar Kai day, where the rabbis come for their education. They came back and said, around 8 or 9 of them came and said that on Saturday night, Sunday, some of their congregants, or again, it wasn't everybody, but 8 or 9 of the rabbis said that a congregant came to them on Saturday night and told them that they had considered suicide, and the rabbi was able to, refer them to and get some help. So, that's literally saving lives. But so from Rabbi Strauchler's small story to, this extreme example, I think that I think that those are some stories. We, unfortunately, in our 91 communities, we've had, from the beginning of Corona, we've had 4 suicides. So it's a very serious matter.
Absolutely. Any other questions? So with that, I'd like to thank the sponsors for our pre-Shavuot Tikkun, Naomi Rifkin Mensel and David Mensel and family. And I'd like to thank Rabbi Fine for sharing the words about his organization. To learn more about Bar Kai, you can see my email to the shul this morning, which has links to Bar Kai's website. And really, it's something very special for us to be able to hear about Rabbi Fine's work, and also to recognize that we're not just Ki Mitzion Teitzei Torah, that we learn something from Israel, but also there's something that we as Jewish communities around the world have something to teach and to give as well, and something that Rabbi David Fine is really on the forefront of doing. So Yasher Koach.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Chag Sameach and
Chag
peace.
Sameach, we hope it's a quiet night here in Israel.
Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem.
We hope
Stay safe.
we hope the
Thank
same
you.
thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Doug Smith, and thank you, David and Naomi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Maria.